I'm coming up on close to 8 years of investing in real estate, and I've accumulated at this point close to $8 million. I mean, technically it may be closer to 9 million, but I'm not gonna know that officially until probably this time next year when I'm done building my custom house. Now, we're in for about 3 or 3.1 million, but I'm expecting the house probably to appraise closer to 4 million. Now, if you've been watching my channel for quite some time, you probably haven't seen me make something similar to this years before, kind of breaking down all of my properties and what it looks like in terms of cash flow and just overall assets. Now, it's been quite a few years since I've actually made an update here, so I wanted to film today's video just breaking down my entire real estate portfolio, including the house, or really our forever home, that my fiance and I are building. Now, first and foremost, let's start with the smallest assets and kind of make our way to that custom house that we are building. Now, I made a couple purchases in 2021. Now, this was not my first real estate investment purchase. That was back in 2017, where I made 2 purchases, one in July of 2017 and another at the end of 2017. We're talking about actually assets that I still hold today. So I guess technically if we're talking about oldest assets, which I'll get to here in a second, it's my old primary residence. But let's jump right into the purchase that I made in 2021. Technically I made 2, one that I actually still have, and that's gonna be a 4-bedroom, 3 full bath, about 2,500 square feet, long-term rental, Fort Worth, Texas. Now, it's on the far west side of Fort Worth and has been renting for the last 3 years at $2,750 a month. My monthly PITI, or principal, interest, taxes, and insurance on that property is about $1,700, and I've been very fortunate with that property. Really only have like 1 minor fix within the last 36 months. Now, the tenants in that property have been great. Their lease technically just expired, but we extended for about 3 months. I may have to find a new tenant come June of this year, and more than likely that cash flow is going to dip a little bit because also the rental market has dipped a little bit, but generally speaking, I'm cash flowing about $1,000 a month on that property. And as far as the total valuation of that property, we're sitting at about $400,000 or maybe $450,000. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, we're gonna kind of go from the lowest valued property that I have to the highest. So the next step up here, we're gonna be moving out of the state of Texas over to Florida, to a property that I technically, I guess, started to build in 2022. It was a new construction home that got completed in early 2023. Fortunately enough, it got rented out pretty quick that first year. The second year as well, it rented out pretty quickly, and I had a tenant actually move out early, pay a convenience fee to be able to get out of their lease early, and then I signed a 2-year lease towards the end of 2024. So I've got a tenant in that property really for the next, I would say, probably 20 or 22 months. Now, the unfortunate side of this property, and I'm always going to be transparent on this channel, I'm always going to be honest, I'm always going to give you the truth. I'm not here to sell you on any course or just bolt you for any kind of reason. That property is going to be the least cash flowing property that I have. And the reason here is really at the time, January-ish of 2023, rates were no longer favorable. They weren't at the low interest rate of like 3.5 that I had on that Fort Worth property that I started this video with. This property is sitting close to 7 or 7.5% on the interest rate. And I also didn't put 20 or 25% down on this property. I essentially used it as a secondary home at the time. So I only put 10% down. That also means I've got to pay PMI. The interest rate was higher at the time, and of course I've got less equity in the property, so we're talking about a pretty significant mortgage as opposed to what I'm getting monthly in rent. Now, the upside here is it has been rented for about 2 years now and has another close to 2 years left as well, renting with the current tenant. I've really had to do absolutely nothing with the property. As I mentioned before, it's a new construction property. Now, the bad news here is its mortgage is at about $3,300 or $3,400 a month, and unfortunately I'm only pulling in about $2,650 a month. So a lot of that cash flow from the first property that I mentioned is really offset by the second property that doesn't cash flow as well. Now, I'm licensed in Florida, and I've definitely thought about selling this property because I don't have a lot of connections anymore in Florida, and it's just a property that eventually is going to be sold. But I'm also a big fan of investing in real estate. It's not causing me any harm. It's not causing me any issues. The tenants are great. I just hear from them once a month. They pay the rent, they keep track of the property, and they're paying down my mortgage. Now, they're paying down my mortgage with the help, unfortunately, from me, but that's also a little bit of a write-off or a loss that can help offset the income that I'm generating from really the rest of the properties that I'm going to tell you about. Now, moving on to property number 3, and this is a property that I built really custom in 2020. I filmed a lot of it when I started generating content on this channel. So if you've been here since 2020, I truly appreciate all of your support. It's been a wild ride trying to consistently build content on this channel, but that particular property was way above my budget. It was a property that I wanted to start in the 400s, and then I wound up moving to the 500s, and then I wound up actually purchasing in more or less the mid 600s. Now, the reason why I did that was I met with a builder and actually custom built this house from the ground up with a built-in Airbnb in order to rent out that room and generate some income, as well as adding an additional room upstairs to rent out to a roommate. About 2 years after owning it, I settled down, met someone, and we actually have a child together now. So it's really been just our house, and those 2 rooms have been a nursery and a guest room. So it really hasn't generated that additional income the last 2 years, but the first 2 years as a single individual while I was continuing to grow my real estate business, it was nice to be able to have most of my mortgage covered by other individuals. Now, as I always talk about on this channel, it's all about being creative and being smart with the decisions that you make. So yes, I went way over my budget in 2020 when it came to building this property. Now effectively being out of that property, and here in just 1 single month in May, that is officially going to become an investment property, no longer my primary property, because I am renting a house close to the house that we're building. That property has appreciated a ton, but also in October of 2020, when I closed on this property with the good relationship that I have with my lender, I got a sub 2% interest rate on this. We're talking a 1.875% 15-year mortgage note. Now, I'm a big advocate of never doing a 15-year note, but in this case, it made absolute sense, and it has been a miracle for me. We're talking about the fact that now, in order to pay off that property, my mortgage is under $400,000. It originally started in the 5s, but because it's been 5 years or a third of a 15-year mortgage, and a majority of my monthly payment is actually going to pay towards principal versus interest, it has been a cash cow, and it will continue to be here in just a couple weeks when I actually rent it out for $58.95 a month, and my mortgage on that property is only $3,400 a month. You can do the quick math on that. That's over $2,000 a month in sheer cash flow, and of that $3,300 or $3,400 monthly mortgage, another $2,000 plus is being paid down from my tenant. So essentially, of the $58.95 that I'm pulling in every single month, over $4,000, close to $4,500 is essentially being added to my net worth. And also on top of that, I did mention I bought it for $620, $640 if you want to include the commissions that I rolled in. Well, to be honest with you, it's now worth close to $1 million. And I also forgot to mention what I bought the last 2 properties for. I'm sitting at about $150,000 in equity, my Fort Worth property, and I'm probably sitting at about $50,000 or $75,000 worth of equity, my Florida property. And now with this property sitting at about $350,000 in equity, you can see the potential in real estate investment. So as far as the properties that I own, and I own 6 of them, 3 of them, and they're the 3 lowest priced homes, have more than $500,000 in equity built into them. But wait guys, I'm only halfway done. I've only covered the 3 properties that are on the lower side as opposed to the 3 I'm about to tell you. Now the next 3 properties are worth well over $1 million. The custom house that I'm building, I'm gonna be discussing last. It's probably gonna be worth close to $4 million as I mentioned at the beginning of this video. But the next couple properties don't just, start with jumping in to a $1 million+ property. And I'll break that down to you. The first property I'm gonna discuss is a 4-unit office space. It initially was intended for my real estate company to operate out of 2 of the 4 units. But while I'm talking about this property and cash flow, I'm not talking about a massive amount on this property. A couple reasons why. This property in itself was something I intended on owner occupying, so I have a pretty low interest rate on it. I moved my real estate team back in 2022 into this property. It didn't work out. I stopped building my team, and I moved another tenant into 2 of the 4 units, and the other 2 have been regularly rented out since I purchased this property in 2022. So going back to cash flow, it is a 20-year commercial note at a pretty favorable interest rate of about 3.5. The unfortunate side is it's in Dallas County. The taxes are pretty horrible, and as I mentioned just a second ago, because it is a 20-year mortgage, the cash flow is going to be less than if I had a 30-year fixed, but it's commercial. You don't get traditionally 30-year mortgages on commercial property. But just like my 15-year note on my old primary, a good amount of the monthly payment is actually going towards principal, and it's a very low maintenance property, not because it's brand new, but because I've got a pretty substantial HOA on it that covers everything when it comes to that property. And then as far as commercial tenants go, they generally are gonna be better than residential. So let's talk about the numbers real quick on this particular property. If we're including taxes and insurance on this property, which are not escrowed because it's commercial, we're talking about a monthly payment of about $8,500 a month. Now, if we talk about the 3 tenants that I have, one that occupies 2 units, the other 2 that occupy a singular unit, we're talking about a little over $10,000 a month in income. So yes, it does cash flow, but it doesn't necessarily cash flow as much as some people may want on a particular property like this. But let's jump over to the entire valuation and how I got this property. As I mentioned just a second ago, I didn't jump into a property that's valued at about $1.3 or $1.4 million. I bought a quadplex with my VA loan in 2019. I held that for, I think, 3 years before I decided to use the 1031 exchange, roll a significant amount of that profit into this commercial property in 2022, and it's been rented out ever since. So if we're talking about overall value, we're probably in the 1.3 to maybe 1.4 range. This particular property, if I wanted to sell each individual unit, I could sell unit 4, unit 3, and then unit 2 and 1 together. They would definitely sell for more if I sold them individually, but I'm likely not gonna sell this property anytime soon. Just gonna continue to have them pay down my principal. So again, it's valued anywhere between 1.3 or $1.4 million. Total payoff right now is at about $900,000. So if you do the quick math there, I'm sitting at about $400,000 or $500,000 in equity. You add that to the first 3 properties, I am a millionaire in terms of equity with those 4 properties. But let's move on to property number 5, which if you've been subscribed to this channel really over the last couple years, you may have seen the process of this particular property being built, and that's gonna be my luxury cabin in Broken Bow, Oklahoma. But just like the property that I just mentioned, I didn't walk into the city of Hochatown or Broken Bow and decide to build a property well over $1 million. I actually bought a property, which was my first property, back in 2017 with my VA loan. You can kind of see a little bit of a pattern here, I guess you could say, between these last 2 investments. I bought my duplex in July of 2017, and I held that property for a solid 5 years. A portion of that, I actually lived in the property before moving out and buying another property. But similar to my commercial property, I eventually sold it in 2022, and I again utilized a 1031 exchange to upgrade to what is now essentially my only short-term rental that I have. It's a massive luxury cabin in Broken Bow, Oklahoma, but it's also my first property that I technically get to enjoy as a short-term rental. Obviously being my only short-term rental, if my fiance and our little son and our dogs want to go up to the cabin, it's a short 3 or 3.5 hour drive. We get a block off a weekend or block off a couple nights during the week, go up there, enjoy it, but it's also something that we are going to be able to enjoy with the growing family that we have for decades to come. Now, this particular property is not going to be easy to give you a breakdown in terms of monthly cash flow. I can tell you, if we're talking about November and December and the holidays, I make over $20,000 a month on this particular property. It's a short-term rental, and my monthly expenses are somewhere in the $10,000 range. So if you look solely at those 2 months, it is an incredible property. But then you look at a slow month like February, where I almost lose money or maybe break even at best. However, what I can tell you is the overall net profit in 2024, while it was rented truly from January to December of 2024, I began renting it out in the middle of 2023, and I had a considerable amount of actual net profit from this property in 2024, sitting between $60,000 and $70,000. And bear with me here, if you haven't followed my full story, if you've made it this far in the video, 8 years ago, I used to teach high school math. I had a master's degree in education and a bachelor's degree in math, making about $50,000 or $60,000 a year. So to have now a property 8 years later that essentially profits me in net profit more than I was making teaching, needless to say, it's just absolutely crazy for me to even realize that this is what's happening every single day in my life. So yes, my cabin in Broken Bow definitely cash flows, large in part because of that property that I purchased in 2017 and sold in 2022 using a 1031 exchange. I had about $300,000 in profit from that property that I rolled into this property, and I'm sitting at about $600,000 in equity now in this cabin. And another interesting aspect of this property, and really some upside when it comes to this property, is if rates do come down, I'm gonna cash flow even better. I'm sitting at close to an 8% interest rate, and I know we can all agree that we want interest rates to come down. And if interest rates do go down, I'm likely gonna be cash flowing anywhere from $500 maybe to $1,500 more a month in cash flow. Now, this is a 30-year fixed, and on a monthly basis, on a pretty large mortgage of $8,300 a month, only a small portion of that is actually going down, pay my principal. But I do have about $6,300 of that $8,300 a month that's going towards interest that we could definitely nail down and have come down if interest rates do continue to trickle and fall. So if you go ahead and add all of the values of those 5 properties, I'm sitting a little shy of $5 million when it comes to real estate assets. Now, all of those effectively in a couple weeks, when I'm including my primary residence, are all gonna be generating income. Now, this next property that I'm gonna be talking about is never gonna generate income, but what it will do is it will appreciate over time. I will continue to pay down the note, and it will be an asset that eventually, at some point in my life, maybe eventually when I'm no longer here, that does get sold. And where the money may go at the end of the day, I may have written in a will, but it's still a real estate purchase that is going to be valued and continue to gain value in the long run. And that, of course, if you haven't watched any of my most recent videos, is the custom home on 2 acres that I am building in Southlake, Texas. Now, this particular property was very difficult to obtain. I had to buy basically a lot for $1 million last year, about 12 months ago. Now, I didn't have the funds at the time to buy it, so I took a HELOC out of my primary in order to have the down payment on that in order to purchase it, largely because the lot I knew was a prime opportunity. And if I tried to sit there for maybe 30, 60, 90 days and get the down payment, it likely would have been sold. So I jumped on it, got a HELOC on it. I've paid off the HELOC since, but I used that HELOC initially to use as a down payment in March of 2024 to be able to close effectively on the lot. Then fast forward to the end of 2024, I then converted it to about a $3.1 million construction loan. And instead of a $200,000 or $250,000 down payment that I had on my lot, I now had to have a $650,000 down payment on that $3.1 million loan. Now, when I say $3.1 million loan, it's a construction loan, and we are still in the early phases of that construction loan. So we haven't exhausted really a large portion of that at all. Really, over the course of the next 15 months, I will have exhausted that entire amount and have a completed home. But as of right now, we haven't even laid the foundation. But as I walked into the title company last November to close on this particular construction loan, I was coming in with about $650,000 as far as a down payment. A portion of that was the HELOC that I took out again. Portion of that was actually my second investment property that I purchased back in 2021 that I rolled in. And then a portion of that was my real estate brokerage's stock. So a combination of all of that, as well as just savings that I had, made me accrue that down payment to be able to close on the construction loan in late 2024. Now, this is really where things get interesting, and I knew all along that building this house was definitely going to generate more value than what I'm really in for the property. I guessed maybe somewhere between 3.3, 3.5, but we have some great news since actually closing on the lot and closing on the construction loan. I actually recently found out by my neighbor that he is selling his 11 acres. That 11 acres, not including his house, is going to be building pretty spectacular custom homes. Now, those are gonna be on a 1/3 to maybe 3/4 of an acre, and certainly not as large as my custom home, and they're gonna be starting at $3 million. So I may be all in for about $3 million or $3.1 million, but I wouldn't be surprised come 15 months later. And if you wanna stay tuned with all of the updates that I have on this job, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and stay tuned for likely monthly updates on that. But I wouldn't be surprised when I close on that officially and move in, that it's valued closer to $4 million, leaving me in a situation where I'm likely walking into the property with $1 million in equity and over $600,000, if not $650,000 in cash that I actually brought to close on the property. Now, I will say the current construction loan is at a 7% interest rate, and it is only incurring interest on the amount that I have pulled. So it's a pretty low mortgage rate right now, but towards the end, in about 15 months, it will be a pretty substantial mortgage payment on a monthly basis. But all of the investment properties that I mentioned earlier in this video is what really has allowed me to be able to go and build a custom $3 or $4 million home and not expect it to generate any income and just call it our forever home that we will be able to enjoy for decades to come. So the plan here is to refinance in about 15 months when the job is done, refinance it to my VA loan, get that 7% maybe down to 4 or 5, lower the interest rate substantially, and move in and start to enjoy it. Now, obviously, when we're talking about this custom build, we're not going to talk about any kind of cash cash flow. We're not gonna talk about any kind of expenses. It effectively is going to be a home that I live in for the rest of my life. But as I mentioned just a second ago, I couldn't do that without the aid of all of the other investments I've made prior. So adding all of this together, I am close to $9 million in real estate assets. My goal is to hit that $10 million mark sooner versus later, but we've got a pretty big project on our hands here with the house. But I would say within the next 2 or 3 years, we're gonna eclipse that $10 million mark, which again, as I mentioned earlier in this video, to be going from making $50,000 a year to 8 years later, maybe 10 years later at that time, hitting $10 million in real estate assets is just absolutely surreal. Well, that's the total breakdown, guys, of close to $9 million in real estate assets. It's probably gonna be a couple more years until I make another update here because, as I mentioned before, the next 15 months are gonna be dedicated to building the house, not really investing anywhere else. But stay tuned, as a lot of you have for years on this channel. Now, if you have any questions in terms of how I started, how I got really the snowball effect to really start to begin, or just really any questions when it comes to real estate investing, I feel like at this point, 8 years into the industry, 9 years, I guess, close to investing in real estate, or really just starting to pick up Rich Dad, Poor Dad and trying to learn all things when it comes to investing in real estate, leave a comment in the comment section down below. Reach out to me via text. You can schedule a Zoom call. You can DM me on Instagram. I'm here to help and really give back in any way that I can. But that's all I got for you guys this week. I appreciate all of the love and support. Make sure to like and subscribe. It really does help. And stay tuned for next week's content.